Hey there, everyone. How's everything? I guess it's probably terrible considering everything that's been going on, but that's neither here nor there at the moment. Today, I wanted to talk about schizoid intellect. Man, I knew I was gonna have this problem. Just I'm gonna butcher the word over and over for some reason. I don't know. It's because I overproduce a little saliva or something, but certain words, man, I just trip over them like nobody's business, no matter how familiar I am with the word. Intellectualization. Thank you. I'll probably trip over it at some point or another again. But in any case, I want to talk a little bit about this. Somebody had suggested it. I believe it was. Oh my gosh. I'm so bad with names. No. I'll remember. I'll remember. At some point, I'll remember. I just can't remember right now. I'm sure it'll like pop into my head at some point. But in any case, somebody had mentioned to talk on the subject of intellectualization and how it maybe functions as a defense mechanism, because it's something that we often do as individuals with schizoid or other types of socially averted stuff, or basically a lot of PDs that involve the repressing, or KJ Roberts. That's the commenter person who told me to talk about it. I believe, yeah, it should be KJ Roberts. Anyways, it's anyone that's basically trying to avoid specific types of emotions. And they tend to be introverted, so sometimes there's some avoidance too that use intellectualization to cope and defend themselves as well. It's basically this idea that, well, here, I'll read the definition here on Wiki. In psychology, intellectualization is a defense mechanism by which reasoning is used to block confrontation with an unconscious conflict and its associated emotional stress, where thinking is used to avoid feeling. It involves removing oneself emotionally from a stressful event. Intellectualization may accompany, but is different from rationalization and pseudo-rational justification of irrational acts. So to differentiate that, basically, that second part, the latter, is more when you're trying to jump hoops inside your mind in order to defend something that is irrational by justifying it as rational, but that's different than intellectualization, as it kind of explains there. Intellectualization is one of Freud's original defense mechanisms. Freud believed that memories have both conscious and unconscious aspects, and that intellectualization allows for the conscious analysis of an event in a way that does not provoke anxiety. Okay, so intellectualization is not so much about trying to rationalize things, it's more about trying to detach oneself to a memory or a specific ongoing event, even the present time, and the present reality at any given time, in order to detach from it. So you detach from it by thinking about stuff in a logical, factual sort of manner. You think about things in the sense of efficiency or pragmatism sometimes, or anything that has little to no emotional value. So if it's almost like the same way if you were to tell somebody, well, why am I going to cry about something that just happened? That is not going to help me accomplish the task or retrieve the solution that is required that I find in order to fix the problem in front of me. So crying or getting mad or whatever emotion have you, is you intellectualize it in your mind as being irrelevant and pointless. And that's why a lot of schizoids, though we do possess a variety of feelings, because we have trouble accessing them or understanding them in any real way that makes sense to us, we tend to intellectualize our feelings. So we almost reason ourselves into believing that the feelings we are feeling are either irrelevant, stupid or something, or inefficient and useless in some way. And so thus it allows us through mental processes to remove ourselves from those emotions, because we tend to gravitate toward things that we can make sense out of. So since we spend so much time constructing our own internal worlds, and I'm not just talking schizoids, just schizoids tend to do it a little bit more. When something doesn't fit into our internal worlds very well because it's emotional, and we can't adapt to it because it's emotional, then we tend to remove it from our internal world or exclude it when it's trying to intrude upon us. So I think that's part of why oftentimes if you're approached with emotion or high levels of emotion by an external force, meaning another person, you tend to intellectualize their situation, detach yourself from the feelings they're feeling, detach yourself from the feelings you're feeling, because you don't understand them and you don't understand their feelings. So then that's perceived as a lack of empathy, because you're intellectualizing their situation instead of trying to understand their feelings, because, well, we have trouble doing that. That's the whole point. And thus you end up looking cold and detached, when in fact you more than likely do it because you don't want to deal with your own feelings about their feelings, not so much because you don't want to deal with their feelings. We rationalize it as just not wanting to deal with their feelings, but oftentimes it's because we don't understand what we are feeling. It makes us uncomfortable. It brings up anxiety, uncomfortable just sensations, and thus we intellectualize it to remove and discard any unwanted material. And I've always found that really interesting. I do it. I've done it for years. I know a lot of schizoids out there do it too, and it's not just schizoids. There's a lot of avoidants that do it. Anyone that basically has chosen this or kind of gravitated toward this, even unconsciously, as a defense mechanism. It's not everyone that does it, but some people do, and it's just the manner in which we can cope with the inability to deal with emotions, or the in some people's cases, the ability to understand those emotions and the fear of those emotions. In the case of the schizoid, it's more the former, where we don't know what to do with them, we don't know how to manage them, so then we don't want to deal with them because they seem irrational, erratic, crazy, and so we think, what's the point of messing with it? And so we discard and we intellectualize. Maybe in the case of an avoidant or other types of social aversion, they may fear those feelings or memories, not so much see them as pointless or anything. And so then they use intellectualization to step away from that fear, to step away from that anxiety and discard. So it's similar, different, like perhaps different motives, perhaps, but the solution is the same, which is the intellectualization. Now, I'm trying to think of an example of a situation in which you might do that. Let me just kind of think for a second here. Okay, so... Okay, an easy example. So, if you're approached by somebody that you have grown fond of because of similar interests or relatability or whatever, and then you say something that happens to trigger them emotionally, right? And I'm speaking as a schizoid here. I can't speak for everyone. And then they approach you with a sense of anger or resentment, or they tell you, well, I didn't like that, and that hurt my feelings, or that made me angry, or that's not cool, man, or that was rude, or I don't appreciate that. Or they suddenly start acting weird, like start acting angry or passive aggressive or strange, and you kind of understand when it happened because you're able to know when the shift in mood changed, but you don't understand why it happened. Maybe it's the tone you said something in. Maybe it's the way you approach a sensitive subject. I don't know. And oftentimes we don't really understand what exactly it was. We just know there was a mood change during a specific event. And so then, because of that, we have a tendency to either intellectualize the situation and go, well, that's not what I meant, and thus you are incorrect for feeling that way. So your emotional reaction, I am not the cause of it. I'm not the causal reason for that emotional reaction because it was your misunderstanding of my statement, or your misanalysis of my statement, because the statement I made was not meant to be an insult or meant to hurt you. You are merely hurt because of your own inequities, or not inequities, your own inadequacies. And so you think through it like that, and so oftentimes it's like a defense way, because maybe you do feel bad for making them feel bad, but you don't really understand what feeling bad for you really kind of means and how to deal with it. You just know it's uncomfortable and you don't want to. And so then you revert to the intellectualization in order to detach yourself from it. And then you feel a little bit better, but then you look like more of an asshole in reality. And then oftentimes it doesn't make you feel all that much better, because then the situation isn't fixed. And then you get angry and frustrated with the other person because they're not able to intellectualize themselves from whatever they're feeling. And so thus you see them as the intrusive one. I think oftentimes that's what it is. I found myself in that situation many, many times. It's something I've been working on for the last few years. I've been improving significantly, especially recently, on that stuff, because well, oddly enough, by intellectualizing your intellectualization, you can come to some conclusions and some solutions that are pretty useful to you. And I think it becomes more about not continue. You have to stop thinking about your own emotions or the emotions of others as being that irrelevant, pointless, useless, inefficient thing, because it's a reality. And by denying a reality, which is you are human, and thus you have some form of emotion, even if you're schizoid, you have some variation of emotional input and output. It's just we lack often the tools to interpret it or to know what to do with it. Or it's stunted. We just don't feel as much, but we still feel. So because we don't feel as often, when we do feel, it's very difficult for us to manage. So it's like I said, you have to kind of intellectualize your intellectualization. I can't fucking say the word sometimes. And you have to really think about why you choose to do the things you do. Why you make those choices that seem like the most efficient, seem like the most rational choice, but they don't reflect very well in our actual reality, in our social reality. And then you oftentimes either by doing this, you exclude others, or you remove yourself, or you just generally cause a situation for yourself that is either further uncomfortable or leaves you empty and alone. And that's also not a good feeling. So you're able to use this defense mechanism in order to push away these negative emotions, only to retrieve new ones that are still negative, but now you're more lonely than ever. So it's kind of like you take out a loan, and then the debt stacks up. There's an interest payment, and that interest payment is loneliness, because you will still have those negative emotions in one respect or another. They might just translate into some other form. Because I've met a few schizoids, and I've talked to more and more because of doing this channel, and a lot of us are sad. A lot of us are depressed. A lot of us feel depressed about our lack of motivation. Feel depressed about our anhedonia. We feel bad about it, about having it. And sometimes we feel bad about our over-intellectualization of life and our inability to just sit down and enjoy good feelings. Because what's interesting, I think, is that this intellectualization doesn't just occur when you're dealing with negative emotions. Sometimes it occurs because you're so used to using it as a mechanism, you start defending against positive emotions as well. So when someone makes you feel good, or say you meet someone and you have a conversation, and that conversation gives you good feelings, even when we get a little bit of that dopamine, because we don't get it as often, it makes us very uncomfortable. We start feeling good, and then we don't know what to do with it, and then it feels weird, and then so we'll intellectualize that situation and almost put ourselves back into a neutral state. because we prefer to be in a neutral state that is safe. And the neutral state is safe. The neutral state is familiar. And when there's an overemphasis of either positive or negative emotion, and as a schizoid we have trouble dealing with it, we end up wanting to revert back to that neutral state. Whether we actually want to or not, we kind of just end up doing it. And what sucks is that this sort of intellectualization can become useful when dealing with negative emotions in that respect. It's long-term harmful, but you also end up doing it when it's supposed to be a positive. So then you start conflating all emotional outbursts or all emotional rises within you as negative, or as uncomfortable, or as scary in some way or another. That's my take on why we use this defense mechanism, and that's based on my experience of using it myself, and then retroactively looking at how I handled situations and the results of those situations and the long-term results of me making those choices. If that makes any sense. I hope I'm making fucking sense. Just on a side note here, you guys have been seeing what's going on with social media. You've been seeing what's happening with YouTube. You've been seeing what's happening with Twitter and everything else. Please follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Parler. Follow me on Facebook. I got to start uploading some of these videos to BitChute and other places, just in case something happens, channel gets taken down. Maybe I say some wrong keyword or something. I'm not entirely sure. A lot of these choices seem to be pretty arbitrary and emotionally driven on the part of these oligarchs. So, again, I don't know when that could happen. And I know I have a very small channel, and I know I have, 200 people now? Thank you, by the way, for getting me to 200. But I want to keep those 200 people. I don't want to disappear from you guys, because I'm enjoying this back and forth relatability. It's making me feel good about life in ways that I never thought possible. So, let's please just follow on Twitter, follow on Facebook, follow on whatever platform. I got to make an Instagram or some shit. Parler, especially, since that's still kind of up. I haven't joined Gab because I don't like that there's no mobile app for it, and also don't like some of the stances the creator has taken at this point when it comes to art, especially art and stuff like that. So there's some issues there, so I haven't quite shifted over there. But please follow me on whatever you can, comment on here, share this, subscribe, whatever. I don't want to get disappeared, because I like this communication. This form of communication is very helpful to me right now, and hopefully it's helpful to you as well. Okay, moving on. One further thing that I found interesting on this wiki page when I was kind of looking at it a little bit earlier was the psychoanalytic controversy regarding Freud himself. I found it really interesting because and I would love to read more into it, but it basically talks about how he was one of the originators of this idea of a defense mechanism via using intellectualization, and that some of his fellow psychologists were essentially they were suggesting that Freud's continuous creation of various theories of psychoanalysis were a form of intellectualization he was using in order to deal with his own anxiety or emotions. So he was essentially creating all these theories and associating with his own life experience, applying it to other people's life experiences in order to make his own life experience more tolerable and palatable. So there was this argument that he was basically intellectualizing psychoanalytical research for the purposes of his own defense mechanisms. So I thought that was really, really cool. Really, really interesting. I'd love to read more on that. If anybody knows more about anything written about that, go ahead and share it, link it or something. That's very interesting to me. And I always found the concept of academics over-academicing their fields for personal reasons, and thus almost corrupting the science behind their fields. I always found that kind of idea interesting, and it tends to happen quite often. I'm just going to switch over to this wallpaper. It just has these array of emotions that people feel that I often have trouble differentiating between sometimes. See, this is another thing. Okay, this is funny to me. I find this humorous. So I am able to know or understand happy, sad, angry, and some... Okay, so that's pretty much it. Like, I kind of get some aspects of the stuff on this list. I kind of definitely get some aspects on the stuff on this list. And I really get some aspects on the stuff of this list. So progressively, I feel more on this list stuff than I do this one. But this one is a lot. And then this one is the least. And then the more nuanced emotions, I probably couldn't really differentiate between them if I was feeling. Like, I couldn't tell you when I'm cheerful and when I'm confident and when I'm excited or when I'm satisfied or silly. It kind of just starts all melding together when it comes to that. When it comes to sadness, though, I can more or less tell you when it's discouragement, unhappiness, unloved, withdrawnness, shame. I can tell the difference between those, not so much based on the feeling itself, but the associated context for why the feeling occurred. You get me? So if I said something that makes me feel bad, I associate it to ashamed. If I heard someone say something that damaged my emotions, which almost no one can do except for, like I said, my wife and children, and maybe my closest friends, and there's very few of those, I will maybe feel unloved or withdrawn or lonely or something like that. And then gloomy or disappointed, it will be when I see like everything's going on in the world right now. When I look at that and I study it and I try to figure it out, I often feel gloomy and disappointed. So I can differentiate between those a lot easier than, say, the stuff on the happy list. The angry list becomes a lot easier for me because I tend to be annoyed, disgusted, frustrated, furious, and irritated often. And not really by my local situations sometimes, more about world events and more meta stuff. The stuff that my paranoia sometimes gets a little more associated to. But what's interesting, I think, is that when people approach me with some of these other emotions, and before, I've gotten a lot better at it, when I couldn't really analyze or understand what emotion they were bringing to me, unfortunately for me, my go-to was in this section, which was usually annoyed or bugged. I would never get to the mean or violent, sometimes mean, but definitely not violent or furious. But when people would approach me with things and I couldn't really understand, or I couldn't intellectualize emotions very well, annoyed, bugged, and if it continued, really frustrated. And I would only get mean when the person was feeling intrusive, like they were making me feel guilty. And since I didn't really understand how guilt or shame worked too well, and I couldn't intellectualize it very well, I couldn't put together why it was that I was feeling how I was feeling, other than just thinking about how brain chemicals are attacking me, because that's what feelings feel like sometimes for schizoids or maybe other people, is you feel like feelings are attacking you. And so you defend yourself, and sometimes people defend themselves by withdrawing. Some people defend themselves with happy feelings. Oddly, they could become manic or excited about something else and just delude themselves and forget or ignore the intrusive feelings that are coming in. But I think in most cases that I've seen is a lot of schizoids will kind of gravitate toward the sad pile when they want to disconnect, or when they're starting to feel in a way that they don't want to. They'll intellectualize and then kind of end up in this zone oftentimes. Now, this section over here, the other feelings. Wow, man. Okay, so bored. Confused, curious, embarrassed, jealous, moody, responsible, scared, shy, uncomfortable, worried. You know what's so weird is that I often feel some of these. I used to experience tons of anxiety. I don't go shame, but I know people that are avoidant that shame is often the direction things go in. Feelings of shame and feelings. Well, see, look, they have ashamed here and ashamed here. This is a silly list. This is a dumb, silly list. There's a lot of stuff that you can conflate together and work together. It's a mixture. I'm also trying to think of other examples in which, that way, you know, I can increase the relatability for this video for some of you. Let me think of one or two experiences or examples of times in which I intellectualized emotions that I didn't want to deal with or was confused about. I know that in school, when I was going to the university, there had been situations in which, and I always hated group work. Group work was the fucking worst, right? Because you had to rely on other people in order to achieve goals. And as well, schizoids tend to be very self-sufficient for that reason, because we don't want to rely on people, because people tend to be emotional, and then the emotions are confusing and make us angry and so on, or just, you know, indifferent and things like that. It ends up being more energy expenditure on our part than we'd like. Like, we would have spent less energy doing it ourselves than participating in a group in order to achieve the same goal, which doesn't make any sense considering that you should be able to share the responsibilities and thus make the workload lessen for each individual. But if it worked that way, then things would get accomplished. But oftentimes it doesn't work that way because people have a lot of factors that set in as far as their ability to actually do their part. So I remember there were situations at the university in which I would be in a group situation and I would accomplish my task or goal, and then when I would come to the next class and when others would not do the same, I would become, I would become annoyed and bugged initially, right? Because I would be like, okay, well, that's unfortunate. Now my workload's going to have to be altered, or now I have to stress about whether you're actually going to accomplish your goal or not. And so then, obviously, for, you know, reasons of expediency, you would say, well, how come? What happened? Why were you not able to accomplish your goal? And okay, so when somebody would give me a reason that made sense, like I was very sick, or I was there was a death in the family, and I was preoccupied with other events that were big, and so on and so forth, my feelings would revert from annoyed and bugged back to well, whatever, it's not on here, but, you know, neutral. And I wouldn't be happy, I wouldn't be neutral, I wouldn't be sad for them, really. I would be more like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense, so thus I will not continue to be frustrated with your lack of accomplishment or your lack of progress. Yeah. And so there'd be other times, though, when the person's excuse was I fell asleep, or I wasn't feeling it, or I was fighting with my parents or my sister, I was this, I was that, some kind of emotional excuse or reason for why I didn't accomplish, and then they would make some kind of rationale for why they would in fact catch up, and thus it won't be a problem, right? And it was already a problem because at that point we needed to continue progressing in whatever project it was that we were working on. So when they would give me a response like that, I would start gravitating toward the more frustrated, or not furious, but frustrated, kind of mad, because then I would catch myself, you know, being kind of mean in some respects. I would say something like, well, what does that have to do with getting this done? That's irrelevant. Or I would say, okay, so are you gonna, like, what are we supposed to do now? We were supposed to discuss this today. Now we can't, because you got your feelings hurt. And I would obviously, and what's funny is that some of the people in the other group, they'd be like, you know, before I even chime in, they might say like, oh, I get that because of this, and that's happened to me. And, oh, I understand, as long as it gets done, blah, blah. No, I would say something like that, and then I'd look like a complete asshole. And then the other people would be like, wow, this guy's a dick. And in my mind, I'm thinking, why am I the asshole? You didn't accomplish your task because of some irrational sense of not wanting to do it because you were upset about something unrelated to the task. And so then you get mad because you're like, why couldn't you intellectualize your emotional situation into understanding that your task still needs to be completed, for it is not associated to whatever it was that was causing you distress. So because I can be caused distress by some other factor and then disconnect it from the project at hand and then still accomplish my task, I expected it from others, and then I would get annoyed or upset. And obviously this is something that, you know, it's not the best way to handle things. There's a difference between, you know, somebody that's being completely lazy or somebody that's being completely irresponsible, and another when a person was having some kind of emotional situation. They were, because emotional situations seem to, for, you know, people with regular neurotypical individuals, it can often be debilitating. Or what if that person suffers from a different type of PD that I don't understand, and so thus it is debilitating. Some of the depression or the anger that it causes is debilitating, and they weren't able to accomplish the task. And now I'm beginning to be better at differentiating between irresponsibility and laziness and a legitimate grievance of some kind. But nonetheless, I still expect the person to accomplish their end goal. Otherwise, if they cannot because of their situation, then they should approach the professor explaining why they cannot and recuse themselves from the group so that we don't get penalized or our workload gets slightly reduced, perhaps. Then you often have asshole professors that don't give a fuck that you have 25% more workload because somebody bailed, and so then they just reprimand that individual or fail them, and then you end up having to do extra work with absolutely no compensation for it, unless they're cool, and then they're a little more lenient on the grading, and then that makes up for it too, because sometimes you can't accomplish as much because you have other tasks that you needed to prioritize or whatever. I know, right? Way to make a interesting story or a story about something that happened to me sound so fucking boring. I find that hilarious. If you want an interesting gamer, because I'm a gamer, you know, I play a lot of League of Legends and, well, a bunch of other video games, mostly RPGs and things like that. Some shooters. If you want kind of a gamer example of a situation in which you might intellectualize a situation and either harm or make uncomfortable the person that doesn't do or doesn't require that sort of defense mechanism, or, you know, they approach emotions in a different way, there could be situations in which you're playing video games with a friend, or if you don't consider them that much of a friend, an acquaintance of some kind, but whatever, somebody that you often play video games with, and, you know, sometimes you have those people that get angry. They get particularly mad during, or very emotional in some way or another during those situations. And I've come across times when somebody gets really, really mad, starts, you know, using profanity or getting angry at you because you made a mistake of some kind during the game. And, you know, you just kind of, I've learned to just kind of shut down a little bit and just kind of listen to them and just ignore it, not internalize anything they're saying. And then just realize, oh, that's just how they process their emotions. And if they want to get a little crazy, they generally, if you leave them alone and you don't antagonize them further, they apologize. A good person will apologize for their behavior. And I've found that to be the situation with people that get angry. They realize they're being angry, and they realize they're being overly emotional about, you know, a video game. And so then if as long as you don't antagonize them further, they'll usually apologize. And it's fine. That makes sense. But there's also been situations where I've been kind of an asshole. Now that I look at it, you know, hindsight being 20/20, in which a person might be emotional during a game and frustrated and thus become discouraged or gloomy or unhappy in some way while playing the game because of their mistakes or whatever's occurred, right? They don't become angry. They become the sad category, right? They start entering this area instead of this area. And so when people start acting this way, because I would see that their play was deteriorating because of their emotional state, then I would become annoyed and bugged with them, because I'd be like, and I even say like, what's going on? Like, why are you playing like this? Like, why are you feeding? Or why are you grieving? Or why are you not trying as hard? And they'd be like, well, they would just give me some rationale for why it's okay for them to be playing that way, when in fact I should have been looking at the fact that they were feeling either ashamed or discouraged. But instead I saw them as making excuses for their failures in the game, and thus becoming withdrawn because they're being a sore loser, or they're being they're sabotaging everyone else in order to put themselves on an equal playing field with the people on their team so that everyone loses with them. So I would perceive it as some kind of selfish, just selfish, non-pragmatic emotional outburst that was detrimental to our gameplay. And that was wrong, because I could have maybe turned that discouragement around, said some words that could have improved a feeling of shame because of a failure in the game, instead of sounding annoyed or bugged, which further made them spiral into results that weren't good for me either, because we ended up losing the game, and then it makes me not want to play with that individual anymore or something, right? So what I'm discovering is that oftentimes when we intellectualize a situation and make feelings irrelevant or pointless and discard them, we actually end up creating a situation that is far less practical for ourselves. Because if I would have not discarded these negative emotions in some way, or reacted in an annoyed, if I did not react in an annoyed and bugged way by their emotions, if I would have remained neutral, calm, and at least tried to understand what it was that was occurring, I would have actually reached a more efficient, better solution for myself and that person. We maybe could have won that game instead, because they might have felt better with some encouragement, or they might have felt better with some rationalizing of why the mistake was made, and thus we should move on and improve the rest of the game. Get it? Calling them a pussy or calling them a bitch for acting like that isn't really the best way to handle any of that. Or, even if you don't use such harsh words, nonetheless, people can tell, and they become further unsatisfied with whatever current activity they're taking part in. Whew, that was a mouthful, all of that, right? So now I'm tired of talking. That expended a decent amount of energy, but I also feel, right, like I was able to talk about some stuff that is important, and maybe make you think about your own defense mechanisms and what it is that sometimes you do when dealing with shit. But thanks for listening. Again, follow on Twitter. Sorry if there was a gap in the audio in there. Oftentimes your kids will just walk in. They'll just walk right in. She saw my little sign. She's looking at this picture and she's like, what are you talking about, feelings or something? And I'm like, yes, I'm talking about feelings. She's like, yucky, icky feelings? And I'm like, yes, yucky, icky feelings. She's just laughing and leaving. But yeah, as I was saying, Twitter, especially Twitter, I seem to be pretty active on that right now, and Facebook, and follow me on there, like my page on Facebook. That way, if I disappear for whatever reason in the future or anytime soon, I can find you guys again, or I can find a way to get things going again. because I think this is important. I think talking about these things is important. I think that having conversations is important. I love conversation. I just hate's a strong word, right? But I highly dislike and find very vexing social situations in which there are certain rules and expectations of one another that might not coincide with your own expectations of others and shit like that. That stuff is very vexing. Having a conversation about a topic and remaining civil and discussing it is not vexing. It's actually quite enjoyable. Very enjoyable. In any case, sub, like, share, blah, blah, blah. Thank you for listening, and I'll be on again in a couple of days for sure. Thank you.